Welcome everyone, welcome to the International Conference on Children and Their Families using the MIX data. So I'm Stephanie Kov, and I'll be sharing today's session on living arrangements, child outcomes and life satisfaction. So it's the Bristol 1 room here, in person. So my co-chair is Dave, who is leaving. He'll be back. And he's the Professor of Social Justice, Director of the Bristol Poverty Institute, and Director of the Townsend Center for International Poverty Research at the University of Bristol. And before I... So here he is. Before I introduce all our speakers, a few words on housekeeping. So I know it was already said this morning, but I'm going to repeat. This session will be recorded and hosted on the UNICEF Mix website and YouTube channel, as well as on the BPI YouTube channel and embedded on the BPI website after the event. By attending, you consent to be part of this recording. For those who are present online, so please ensure that you have added your name rather being listed as guest, as the team will be monitoring attendees, and we also need to know who is asking our speakers questions. You will be able to ask questions via, in person, and then here via Zoom, so the Q&A function, which can be found at the bottom of your screen. And then due to time constraints, we may not be able to answer every question, but for sessions in Bristol, please feel free to get in touch with the speakers after the session to continue the conversation. That means that also, I'm just going to tell you in advance, I'm going to positively discriminate. So people who are in person will have priority to ask questions. But for those, if there is remaining time, we can answer a few questions online. So please note that the chat function is not available to attendees, so please use the Q&A function. Also, very important, if you have several questions, please make sure to ask your question in separate notes, because otherwise it gets a little bit too much. And also, lastly, please be respectful. All events at this conference are being monitored, and we reserve the right to remove attendees whose comments are deemed offensive or derogatory. So we are going to start the presentation with a presentation from Arachu Castro, who is here, as you can see on the camera, and she's going to present the presentation called Impact of Adolescent Motherhood, Poverty, and Child Rearing on Developmental Outcomes in Early Childhood, Cross-Sectional Analysis of Household Surveys from Latin America and the Caribbean. So I believe, Arachu, you want to share your screen or your video?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I will be sharing the recording.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this conference. Today I will present about the impact of adolescent motherhood, poverty, and child rearing on developmental outcomes in early childhood. This is a collaborative study conducted with my colleagues Laura Sánchez-Vincitore and Daniel Cubilla Bonetti from the Universidad Iberoamericana in the Dominican Republic. My name is Arachu Castro, and I'm a professor at the Tulane School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine in New Orleans, United States. We searched several databases for early childhood development and adolescent pregnancy, and included publications in any language since 2015, and screened over 300 articles. We found 4 recent observational studies conducted in single countries that analyzed the associations between adolescent motherhood, poverty, and ECD. Our study is the first cross-national study to analyze the differential impact of socioeconomic and child-rearing factors on early childhood development according to the adolescent status of the mother. We provide evidence that both poverty and child-rearing practices interact in the association between adolescent motherhood and early childhood development delay. The findings underscore the potential benefits of policies that improve educational and employment opportunities for adolescents that help delay the age of motherhood. We analyzed the impact of adolescent motherhood on early childhood development, ECD,
by drawing from multi-country mixed data from Latin America and the Caribbean. Adolescent pregnancy is a complex phenomenon that became a topic of global health interest in 1994 during the International Conference on Population and Development. The complexity of adolescent pregnancy results from intertwined socioeconomic and educational factors that constrain life opportunities for adolescents and have significant consequences for the health and developmental outcomes of their children. Several studies have found that children of adolescent mothers may be at greater risk than children of older mothers of poor infant health outcomes, including low birth weight and preterm birth, undernutrition, perinatal, neonatal, postnatal, and child mortality, and poor physical and mental health. Developmental delay, limited nurturing care, and greater physical assault and psychological aggression from the mothers, and lower language development, educational attainment, life satisfaction, and personal income. Other studies have shown that these challenges are not solely attributable to the mother's age. They are heavily marked by socioeconomic factors, limited educational opportunities, and greater exposure to gender-based violence, which can impact the mother's caregiving abilities. Adolescent pregnancy presents a challenge in Latin America and the Caribbean. According to the UN World Population Prospects, it was the second region in the world in 2021 with the highest prevalence after Sub-Saharan Africa, both in terms of fertility rates and concentration of children born to mothers aged 15 to 19. There is a great diversity in the concentration of adolescent pregnancy within the region, ranging from 24% in Venezuela to 2% in Guadeloupe. In this study, we sought to understand how adolescent motherhood and the combined effects of poverty and child-rearing practices affect ECD across diverse contexts in Latin America and Caribbean countries. We had 3 study aims. First, confirm the association between adolescent motherhood and ECD. Second, determine if the use of violent discipline is more frequent among adolescent mothers than among older mothers. And third, analyze the impact of mothers' beliefs about the physical punishment of children and partner violence on ECD, considering the mother's adolescent status. The goal of the study is to inform effective interventions and policymaking that can alleviate the negative impacts of adolescent motherhood on child development, thereby helping to break the cycle of disadvantage across generations. This is a cross-sectional study from a secondary analysis of the mix of 13 countries with rounds 5 and 6. We will soon add 2 additional mixed 6 countries to our analysis. The study methodology followed the Stoll guidelines for cross-sectional studies, and these countries represent a diverse prevalence of children born to adolescent mothers, ranging from 4% in Turks and Caicos to 17% in Honduras. For each country, we first merged 3 data sets derived from 3 mixed questionnaires: a household questionnaire, the questionnaire for individual women, and the questionnaire for children under 5. We excluded children who did not have data on ECD or the mother's age at the time of birth. We then obtained descriptive statistics on ECD and disaggregated the data by mother's age, child sex at birth, age, family wealth quintile, and mother's educational level. Finally, we compared children whose mothers were under the age of 20 versus those aged 20 and older. For the first study aim, we employed an ANCOVA test by country to assess the impact of maternal adolescence on child development, controlling for the child's age and sex at birth. We then employed another ANCOVA, introducing family wealth quintile and maternal education levels control variables. For the second study aim, we used students' t-tests to determine differences in positive and negative parenting practices between adolescent mothers and those aged 20 and above. For the third aim, we analyzed frequency distributions among mothers under 20 and at least 20 regarding their perspectives on the physical punishment of children and justification of violence in relationships, using the chi-square test to identify differences based on the mother's age. Finally, we calculated average child development scores between those whose mothers justify or do not justify both behaviors, distinguishing by age, and we utilize students' t-test to explore potential relationships between ECD and beliefs in physical punishment or justification of violence in relationships. The combined sample size was almost 25,000 children, of whom 20.8% were born to adolescent mothers. We found that although ECD mean scores vary between countries, children's age, wealth quintile, and maternal education levels are associated with ECD scores across countries. As expected, children age 4 have higher ECD index scores than children age 3. Female children tend to have higher ECD scores, and children born to mothers age 20 and above tend to have higher ECD index scores across all countries. In this table, we present an ANCOVA examining the impact of adolescent maternal status on ECD in two models. In the first one, which controls for the child's age and sex at birth, shows that all the models for each country are statistically significant. In the second model, which also includes wealth quintile and maternal educational level as control variables, also shows that all models are statistically significant. Wealth quintile consistently shows an effect on ECD, and maternal education significantly impacts ECD in 3 countries. The adolescent maternal status remains significant when controlling for wealth quintile and education in 4 countries. In this table, using the child discipline module, we compare the mean scores for positive and negative discipline practices by adolescent status on giving birth, with significance levels determined by students' t-test. We found that mean scores for positive discipline were similar for both age groups, and that the data show a trend toward more positive and less negative discipline practices among mothers age 20 and above, although the differences are small. In this table, we use the questions on beliefs about physical punishment of children and the justification of partner violence to analyze their association with ECD, considering the mother's adolescent status. We found that among women of any age, justifying the partner's violence occurs less frequently than believing in physically punishing their child in most countries. Adolescent mothers believe in physically punishing their children and justify the partner's violence more frequently than older women in most countries, and the children of mothers who do not believe in physically punishing their children and who do not justify the partner's violence have higher ECD scores. Our first discussion point is that in most countries, children of adolescent mothers have lower ECD scores than other children. A central finding is the association between the mother's adolescent status at the time of a child's birth, poverty, and lower ECD scores. The adolescent maternal status remains significant when controlling for wealth quintile and education in 4 countries, indicating that in the other countries, wealth and education may mediate the relationship between maternal age and ECD. This finding is similar to those from other studies that have associated economic and educational disadvantages with adolescent pregnancy. The study's limitations include the cross-sectional nature of the mixed surveys, which precludes causal inferences, and the varying observed effect sizes. Another limitation is that cultural variations across countries, which are not captured in the mixed surveys, may impact the interpretation and reporting child disciplinary practices and beliefs about violence, suggesting a need for culturally sensitive approaches in data collection and intervention design. We found that adolescent mothers, compared to women aged 20 and above, tended to use less positive and more negative discipline practices with their children, and that in most countries they believed more frequently in physically punishing their child and justifying their partner's violence against them. Our findings highlight the significant associations between maternal beliefs in violence and ECD, emphasizing the detrimental impact of physical punishment and partner violence justification on children's development, particularly among adolescent mothers. Several studies have shown that adolescent mothers have fewer skills than older women in self-regulating, coping with stress, being more patient, affectionate, and interactive with their children, providing stimulating opportunities and understanding their children's needs, all of which may lead to less responsive, stimulating, and affectionate care. Adolescent mothers may also experience greater psychological distress, anxiety, and depression, and their stress may be heightened in cultures where early marriage and pregnancy are not normative. Where some scholars have argued that the poverty of adolescent mothers is the most important explanatory variable of ECD delay among their children, others have emphasized that parenting practices, compounded with pre-existing and ongoing social disadvantages, help explain the association between adolescent motherhood and lower ECD outcomes among their children. Our findings collected from multiple countries support the hypothesis that it is a combination of poverty and violent child rearing that accounts for ECD delay among children and adolescent mothers. Our study's findings underscore that strategies aimed at delaying the age of motherhood need to address the socioeconomic context in which adolescent motherhood occurs, in addition to making available sexual education, reproductive health services, and contraceptive methods that are accessible to youth. Consequently, policies that improve educational and employment opportunities for adolescents, particularly those living in poverty, can mitigate some of the disadvantages they face, such as unfulfilled educational aspirations and unstable housing, that predispose adolescents to start child rearing, and when they do, intensify their disadvantage. For adolescents with children, providing resources and knowledge that promote nurturing parenting practices and non-violent family environments is instrumental, in addition to socioeconomic measures, for improving the well-being of both adolescents and their children and reducing existing inequity gaps in early childhood development outcomes. And here's the list of references that I'm sure you cannot read right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arachu. Perfect timing. No, so of course she has prepared in advance. So Arachu, if you don't mind keeping until the end, so we will do all the questions, the Q&A at the end. So whenever you have any question, do not hesitate to put them online, and we'll try to catch them. But for now, I'm going to introduce Anna Barbeta, who is going to do a presentation on kinship structure, child gender, and mother's life satisfaction in Malawi.
So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anna Barbeta. I'm a PhD candidate at Paris School of Economics. And today I'm presenting joint work with Seema Jayachandran at Princeton and Suana O at PSC. This is early work and it's the first time we're presenting, so all feedback is welcome. The title is Kinship Structure, Child Gender, and Mother's Life Satisfaction in Malawi. So life satisfaction has gained a lot of attention in the economics literature. One of the reasons is because it has shifted the attention from pure material wealth to a broader measure of quality of life. And the idea is that it can reveal things that income alone cannot reveal. So differences in well-being that income alone cannot reveal. And so there is a whole literature actually looking at the determinants of life satisfaction, especially in developed countries, because there's no data, well, except now with mix, but there was little data on life satisfaction in developing countries. But overall, like the effects, so they have looked at many determinants of life satisfaction, such as life events such as children, marriage, or other labor events such as being unemployed. And for child gender, in developed countries, there was no effect on life satisfaction. But this might be a bit different in developing countries because child gender might have a stronger effect due to gender preferences and cultural norms. So in Asia, for instance, there are already some studies that have found that child gender affects marital and child outcomes, especially in contexts with son preference. Instead, in sub-Saharan Africa, the literature, earlier studies found absence of son preference or even preference for variety for both genders. But there's recent research that suggests that kinship structure might mediate this relationship. So with this newly available mixed data on young adults' life satisfaction, we can actually test the impact of child gender on parental life satisfaction. But more specifically, what are we doing in this paper? So we use this recent mixed survey from Malawi to study how child gender affects women's life satisfaction. So we are only focusing on mothers with one child, so that the gender of the child provides exogenous variation. Because if we would look at the gender composition, this is an actual endogenous choice because you can decide to stop having children after, for instance, having a boy or after having a boy and a girl. And then we look at how this effect differs for matrilineal and patrilineal mothers. Lineage systems define who belongs to the same kin, and matrilineal groups means that the lineage is defined through the female line, while in patrilineal groups, the membership is defined through the male line. And in some cases, this also goes along with matrilocality. Matrilineality goes along with matrilocality in some cases, and it's the case in Malawi. So it means that when a couple marries, they will live closer to the wife's family if it's matrilocality, and they will live closer to the husband's family if it's patrilocality. And in the case of Malawi, this goes together. So that's why it might happen that daughters are differently valued than sons in Malawi. Malawi is the only country that has variation in this kinship strategy, so we have both types of ethnic traditions and also sizable life satisfaction data. We also look at other impacts on fathers' life satisfaction. We look at early child investments, child outcomes, and also we link it to stated gender preference measures. So the two waves we use are mixed 2014, 2015, and 2019 and 2020. So the question on life satisfaction actually changed over the two waves. In the mix they ask, how satisfied are you with your life? And then the responses ranged from very unsatisfied to very satisfied. And in mix 6, the question was modified to, on which step of the ladder do you feel you stand at this time? And they could answer from 1 to 10. So to homogenize this data across these two waves, we created a binary variable that equals to 1 if it's very satisfied in mix 04, and it equals a step of 5 or higher if it's in mix 06. We actually have a reason to do this, and I can show you, but maybe it's better for the sake of time to show you during the Q&A session. Regarding the sample, we focus on women between 18 and 25 years old, so young women, whose first birth occurred at 15 years old or older with one child and lineage information. Why do we focus on young women? Because in Malawi, if we would include all women but that have only one child, is much more rare that only young women. So it would be an endogenous. So like it's much more representative if we focus only on young women. And lineage is defined at the ethnic group level. So we follow the Birch and others classification as well. I can show you during the Q&A session. Okay, so we already start with the results. Okay, so here, yes, so as I said, the outcome variable is a binary variable that equals to 1 if it's very satisfied. And so what we can see here is that having a child lowers mother's life satisfaction for both genders, but actually has a smaller negative effect for daughters. And this effect persists even if we use different life satisfaction cutoffs for the wave 6, and even if we control for age of the woman, marriage status, wealth quintiles, and other controls. And so the different columns actually just compare the effect to different control groups. So the first one is like, looks at for a woman with only one child, what's the effect of having a daughter on life satisfaction. The second one is compares woman of having a son or a daughter compared to women who have no children. And the last one is the same, but restricting to married women. And now we look at this, we look at the impact of child gender, but differently for matrilineal and patrilineal households. And as we can see actually is that having a daughter has a positive impact, but only for matrilineal mothers. And the pattern is the opposite for patrilineal mothers. And I'm not showing it here, but we did the same regression for fathers. And for fathers, we also see that there's a negative effect of having a daughter, but only fathers in patrilineal groups. Okay. So we look at okay, the idea is like, okay, we see mothers are happier with daughters only in matrilineal groups and unhappier with daughters in patrilineal groups. And the idea is, what's the consequence of this? Why do we care? So the idea is that maybe because of this, or like it's leading towards that parental investments towards a child might be different across these two groups, and it can affect actually early childhood development. And so that's what we looked, and we find that matrilineal households do actually make more material investments on daughters, but only in daughters in matrilineal groups. And instead for patrilineal households, they invest more in homemade toys or objects. But we do not detect any other statistically significant differences in other types of investments, and we find no effects on child health or mother's time. But we do find difference in fathers spending less time with daughters in patrilineal groups, which is consistent with the story. However, we do find that girls have, or suggestive evidence that girls have better early childhood development index scores compared to boys in matrilineal households. So here's a table. So as we can see, if we look at the whole country, we see that daughters do develop better than sons. But then if we restrict the sample to patrilineal groups, we see that the effect is null. While if we restrict it to only matrilineal groups, we see that the difference is there. So daughters develop better than compared to sons in matrilineal groups. And then the last column is putting all things together. While the effect size is there of the interaction, it's not statistically significant, but it might be due to power issues. This index is a weighted average of 9 cognitive and social outcomes, and it includes at least 10 letters that they can identify 10 letters in the alphabet, or for instance that they get along with other children. Okay, so maybe I went very fast. So we provided evidence that having a daughter increases mother's life satisfaction in Malawi, but this is only in matrilineal households. And this is one of the few studies investigating the determinant of life satisfaction in a developing country setting, and especially using this identification strategy. Depending on the kinship structure, child gender also matter for some early childhood investment and development outcomes, as we saw with the Early Childhood Development Index. And so this is a finding that supplements the big literature on the impact of child gender on marital and child outcomes. And examining life satisfaction patterns can provide additional insights into the role of child gender preferences. So we decided to compare these results with those based on stated gender preferences from the DHS survey. And so this is a table using DHS survey, and the outcome variable is son preference index that equals 1 if parents report a preference for more sons and daughters, 0 if they don't have preference, and -1 if they have preference for daughters. And what we see in the especially 3rd, 4th, 7, and 8 column is that patrilineal groups have a preference for son, but this preference is not apparent yet in the earlier, in the younger sample, so between 15 and 24 years old. So it might be the case that mother's life satisfaction is actually revealing this preference that appear at older ages. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna. Good. Sorry. Yes, no problem. All right. And now we're going to switch to another presentation, which is a presentation from another Anna, who is Anna Borgren. Is she with us? Oh, yes. Okay. Protective factors for vulnerable children around the world, an introduction to IPUMS mix.
My name is Anna. I am from IPUMS at the University of Minnesota. And today I'm going to be talking about protective factors for vulnerable children around the world using IPUMS mix. So it's going to be this is a talk on behalf of my co-authors, Liz Boyle and Meher Munir, also at the University of Minnesota. So this talk today is going to be split into 2 parts. First, I'm going to tell you about IPUMS and what we do, and then give an example of research using IPUMS as one possibility that we can leverage the IPUMS version of the mix data to do some research. So what is IPUMS? I keep saying it. It's not actually an acronym. It doesn't actually stand for anything anymore. It used to stand for the Integrated Public Use Microdata Series, which highlights all of the different things that IPUMS does. It's public use, it's harmonized or integrated. We no longer just have microdata, which is why we've kind of abandoned the acronym and now are just branding ourselves as IPUMS. We are a collection of different data projects specializing in harmonization. We have the world's largest collection of international census data through one of the projects, the IPUMS International Project, which is incredibly valuable. But we also have partnerships with other types of organizations, including MIX. So at IPUMS MIX, we have harmonization for over 900 variables that are included in the MIX rounds 3, 4, 5, and 6. To date, we have done harmonization for 92 countries, 218 samples, and over 1,000 data sets. We actually just had a data release last week, so I think these numbers are a little bit higher. We just included 7 new samples of the MIX 6, so we are up to date with all of the publicly available rounds 3, 4, 5, and 6 MIX samples. So why use IPUMS MIX? Really what we specialize in is variable harmonization providing harmonization syntax that consistently codes variables across the rounds. So as demonstrated with the life satisfaction variable in the previous presentation, things change between rounds. And so what we do at IPPMS is we give variables that are similar concepts or identical concepts the same name, the same variable name, and we also enforce identical coding. So all of that data cleaning, restructuring, coding, validation, we've already done for all of the rounds 3, 4, 5, and 6 mixed samples. We also provide a common geographic footprint or harmonized spatial boundary files so that if you are interested in doing research across time, the geographic administrative level 1s are consistent. So we've accounted for boundary shifts and boundary changes that might have occurred within the country, similar to some of the efforts that the IPPMS GIS program is doing, but we are IPPMS, completely separate, especially in the geographic sense. And we also provide comprehensive documentation on all of the data cleaning and coding that we've done. So we provide documentation on any comparability issues or problems that we have discovered, provide that on the website so it's available. We also identify the universe of respondents for every sample, every variable, and every question. So if anything is changing between countries or over time, if you were pooling countries or pooling years, you'd be able to see and make decisions on the universe or the denominator of a particular variable. And we also associate the specific bit of text that is associated with each of the IPPMS harmonized variables.
They're not seeing the right thing online, so maybe we can...
Yes.
Sorry, I've only just seen this comment. So maybe we can just try sharing it
Share again?
Yeah, maybe the share is not the right one.
This one? Try this one.
Yes. Is it better?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
All right. That's great. To start over, oh my goodness. Okay, well, the only important thing is everything is free. So everything, of course, is free. And I'm seeing a thumbs up floating. That's very cute. Okay, so I'll be here for the next 2 days. So if you're all at all interested in IPPMS, anything IPPMS related, come talk to me. I'd love to chat. You can jump on any of the websites, ippims.org or the mixippims.org. We at IPPMS do not independently register users. You must be a valid registered UNICEF user to access any of the IPPMS mix resources. You can browse the data without having anything, but if you were to create a custom data extract, you would have to be a registered UNICEF user. Now, a few notes about a custom extract. What you can do at IPPMS is, instead of downloading individual files for each sample and each country and each year, you can browse through the IPPMS website, select the samples, variables, years that you're interested in, and what we do at IPPMS is we generate a Stata syntax that does all of that harmonization for you, and you download that syntax from UNICEF. We do not disseminate any of the data at IPPMS, but you would download that syntax and the data from UNICEF, run a do file in Stata on your computer, and you would be left with one data file that's all cleaned, all recoded, all ready to go. So I'll demonstrate a few examples of when IPPMS might be a really useful tool for your analysis. It's not right for everything. There are some things that the original UNICEF data, or the mix data, as it's called in every world but mine, is just a better tool for a particular research project. But I'll demonstrate an example of how IPPMS can be really useful, especially in projects that require a lot of samples or a lot of pooling. There's also a lot of support services that we can provide, all free. Oops. Okay, so to demonstrate one of the utilities of IPPMS, I'm going to show some results looking at orphans and vulnerable children experience with anxiety. And this is a demonstration in research that can be really useful to use IPPMS because it's a very small subpopulation, and so in order to have enough statistical power, it can be really useful to pool across multiple samples. This requires a lot of different downloading, cleaning, and pooling if you were downloading the original data, and so with IPMs, because we specialize in harmonization, that's already done and can be a really useful tool. So these are just preliminary results. So, okay. In this example, we are going to look at orphan kids, so kids who've lost either a mother, a father, or both parents, as typically defined by UNICEF. And we're also going to differentiate for the single orphans whether or not the child is living with their surviving parent. We're going to look at the anxiety measures, dichotomizing whether or not a child is experiencing anxiety. I do believe there's a mental health session that would obviously look into these topics in far greater detail than I'm going to here. We, in this presentation, we've pooled 55 of the mixed 6 samples from the adolescent data set, looking at kids from 5 to 14. And we're going to actually do 2 different types of analysis. One is going to look at all kids, comparing non-orphans to orphans. And then we're going to narrow in on looking at just kids who have lost one or both parents from that same 55 countries. And this is really because we want to be able to differentiate not how orphans are compared to non-orphans, but are there different categories of orphans that might make them more or less vulnerable or more or less protected. We're using multi-level logistic regression, and we're also going to look at child, caregiver, and household community characteristics in the model. But as I said, these are pretty preliminary. Okay. So this model is the all children, so comparing the reference group of non-orphans to the different categories of orphans. And this is just showing that all categories of orphan kids experience more anxiety than non-orphans. So not necessarily a groundbreaking result here. When we dig into the orphan-only model, so in this case we're looking at double orphans, kids who've lost both parents. We see that there's not a lot of significance in anxiety except for kids who've lost their parents and are not residing with their mother. Those kids are experiencing less anxiety than double orphans. I'll also point out here that the sample size has dropped to 30,000, showing the decrease of looking just at the orphans. There we go. And these are the rest of the characteristics that we're currently looking at. The child's age, the older kids are experiencing more anxiety. Kids living with an older caregiver or male caregiver are experiencing less anxiety, and kids in wealthier households are experiencing less anxiety. So this is just a recap of those very brief results that I showed on anxiety, looking at the different characteristics of orphans as compared to non-orphans, and then really looking at differences among different types of orphan categories and the other characteristics. Now I'm going very briefly through these results because we are aiming to look at things other than anxiety in this research, leveraging all of the really rich data that Mix has on kids, especially the 5 to 14-year-olds, and really using this pooled sample to be able to look at different types of experiences to see what sort of experiences or characteristics might be protective, differentiating among these different types of orphans. So in conclusion, research like this, where you're looking at very small subpopulations, can be facilitated using IPMs. IPMs can be really valuable when you're wanting to make comparisons across time or between countries, or as in this research, pooling to look at very small subpopulations. I'll be presenting tomorrow some work on child labor that really looks at comparison across countries, so sort of the example of the the other type of research that IPPMS can be really useful for. Once again, IPPMS is completely free. We are grant funded. We are at the University of Minnesota in the US. And if you do end up using any of our harmonization or integration, we really ask that you cite it. As I said, we're grant funded, so we really rely on hearing back from users. Also, if you don't want to use the harmonization, but want to look at any of the documentation that we've provided on the web, that's all free, available. Please cite us too if you use any of that. It just really helps our partnership with our grant funders, but also then our partnership with UNICEF so that we can continue our work on harmonization. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Anna. Very good. Everyone is good with the timing. So we have 11 minutes left for questions. Maybe I could take 3 questions in the room. Oh, is it still sharing? Here. All right. Is there any question in the room? Okay.
Thank you very much, Anna, too. Thanks, Anna, one, too, for your presentation. I use IPPMS for my work, so it was really great to see that I didn't have to do tons of codings to measure the country data sets. So I have 2 questions. One, you probably may have misheard, where you said there were situations in which using mix from UNICEF data set would work better than using IPPMS. So if you could go over that. And then secondly, it's just a request. Could also the merging files be available in R, given that, for if you're using R, familiar with states and then the licensing too. There's a lot of, basically, thank you.
I'll take the second question in the room. Is there a second question? No question. The questions are on the 3 presentations, huh? Just to let you know. Dave. Can you hear?
I have questions for both Annas, so I'll start with Anna 1, if you'll apologise. It was a fascinating talk. I really enjoyed it. But I wondered if there are any policy implications. What do you do about those findings? Have you got some suggestions for improving the situation? And my question for Anna too is, I really appreciate IPPMS, having spent years of my life trying to harmonise DHS and mix, and I know the pain involved in doing it. But my question is, why Stata code? Because Stata is proprietary, there's no public domain clone, whereas R's free and SPSS has a public domain clone. So it's great if, like me, you're a university academic with that, and we have a site license for Stata and I can just run it. But if you don't have the benefits of an ex-colonial power, then you restrict the number of people who can make use of such a fabulous data set that you've managed to create.
Any last question in the room? Oh, here. Okay.
Hello, thank you so much. My question is for Anna Barbeta. Is that right? Figured I should refer to you by name. And I thought it was a really interesting paper, and I'm sure as an economist you've done all kinds of robustness checks for it. But my question is kind of on the endogeneity of life satisfaction themselves on the mothers. If the mothers are in a matrilineal society where they have more power, one might assume that they might be kind of more satisfied with their life to begin with because they have more control over it. I was wondering if you kind of checked whether or not there's already baseline differences in life satisfaction among mothers in patrilineal versus matrilineal communities in your data set. Thank you.
All right. I think I'm going to leave the speaker answer the questions because we have 7 minutes left. Should I let Anna 1 answer?
Okay, yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Thank you. Definitely. So I think we need further research to understand why matrilineal mothers are less satisfied when they have a daughter. More satisfied when they have a daughter. Sorry, wait. I start again. So why patrilineal mothers are less satisfied when they have a daughter? For instance, if it is because they do expect that these daughters are going to marry outside the village, and therefore they will not be there for all age support, for instance, then a complementary policy could be, if these mothers, they don't rely on their children for all age support, especially sons, then they would not be biased towards one specific gender. But that could be, but I think we need further research understanding the causes of this son preference, daughter preference. And regarding the second question about whether there are already baseline differences, actually it's the opposite. So there are a little bit of baseline differences, but in the opposite way. So both, so on average, patrilineal individuals have higher life satisfaction compared to matrilineal in both genders. But I would need to, yeah, I can show you tables later. we can discuss further.
Thank you, Anna 1. Anna 2, for your answers.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I have a question for Anna 1. I would be curious to see those tables that you were going to talk about, the mix 4 versus mix 6. Yeah, we can also talk after too. Okay, so the big question from both is why Stata? And that really has to do with our partnership with UNICEF. As I said, IPPMS does not disseminate data in any way. And what a user is doing is creating a custom syntax, and that syntax is paired with data. Because that custom syntax had to be generated, we had to pick a statistical package to start with. We're a fairly new project. We've only been around for less than a year. So we started with Stata because that is actually the majority of our users use Stata and are familiar with it. It is very limiting though. The biggest feedback that we get is why not R or why not something else? We are hoping to expand into something else. We're looking at ways to recreate that syntax in R. We need some more grant money in order to do so properly. So that's the big question. The big answer is it is just tricky to create something, and we're hoping to expand. The other question is, when would be a time to use mix data and not to use IPPMS? And like I just said, our project is fairly new. We are less than a year old, and therefore we only have about 70% of the variables available. So currently, if you want to do work on immunization, it's just not going to be available at IPPMS. We're almost there. Give us about 6 months, and we'll have them out. But that would be the biggest limitation, is we just don't have all the variables available at this point. And I do want to make a quick plug for, we have an IPPMS DHS, so a harmonized version of the DHS. That you can get in R, SPSS, and Stata. It's a different extract system due to a different partnership. So make a plug for that. Happy to talk about it. But it's sort of the same user interface on the web and things like that.
Thank you, Anna times 2. So I think there are some questions online, so maybe I'm going to read them. So the first one is for Anna 1. Considering the rising prevalence of medical sex selection during the perinatal period in developing countries, how do you justify the assumption that the first child's gender is exogenous? Ooh. Second question. Sorry. Was it for Anna 1 or 2?
Anna 2.
Anna 2. For Anna too, this is probably unrelated, but I'm wondering if there is a repository of resources somewhere for analyzing mixed data, such as there is a GitHub repository to attempting to recreate DHS reports chapter by chapter. Okay, I know one.
Okay, thanks a lot for the question. So actually, in sub-Saharan Africa, there hasn't been a lot of evidence of abortions on the child gender. I think it's more concentrated in Asia, where son preference has been more prevalent. So we actually assumed, I mean, I've done fieldwork also in Malawi, and there's some people who start using ultrasounds to know the gender, the child gender, but I think it's like, it's not as common, but even if people do it, it's even rare to actually abort because of the gender.
This is Anna, too, for the people online. No, currently we don't have any type of resource or repository that would help users recreate reports, but that's a great idea, and I'll add that to the list of things that we should do if we get more grant funding. Thank you.
All right, I think we are finishing exactly on time. So thank you very much. This is the end of the session of living arrangements, child outcomes, and life satisfaction. So thank you very much for everyone for participating.